Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. We do appreciate you taking the time to come and hear about how Sungard and Megaport might be able to help you solve some of the challenges you're experiencing around finding the right cloud connectivity. And welcome to today's session. Presenting today will be myself, Michelle Levan, Vice President of Global Field Engagement with Sungard Availability Services, Andrew Coggins, Sales Director with Megaport, and Todd Wenzel, Solutions Architect with Megaport. Now, we will have a recording of this session available after today. So if there's something that you would like to share or revisit at a later date, you will be able to get a recap of everything that we are presenting during today's session. Now, also during the presentation, if you have any questions that come up, please do use the Q&A chat box that you can find at the bottom of your screen. If you post them there, we will try to either address those questions along the way or during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Okay, with that said, let's just go ahead and jump in. So I think it's more than fair to say that today's application and IT landscape, it's both more complex as well as more distributed than ever before. And when you think about it, it's starting to create a unique challenge for many organizations as they try to understand what is the best way to navigate across a complex, distributed application landscape. Now, contributing to this complexity is the fact that many organizations and enterprises, they've increased their use of different types of cloud, that's either private or public. And because of this, it's resulted in a dramatic increase in both multi and hybrid cloud environments. In fact, the Flexera 2020 cloud report shows that 87% of organizations have a hybrid cloud strategy, while a larger 93% have a multi-cloud strategy. And typically, they're averaging 5 or more cloud environments that they're trying to connect to. Now, also consider the increasing application demands that are coming into play here. This results in end users needing extremely high application performance as well as fast response times to support things like video streaming, voice calling, financial trading, virtual storefronts, and even for things like big data analytics. Now, finally, let's consider an additional common challenge that many organizations experience, and that's the fact that traditional IT infrastructures, they still have to deal with these, either sitting in their co-location or in their own private data centers. So when you're adding up all of these things, it means that you have even more demands on how you build out your network architecture in order to get the overall performance that you need. So when you think about solving this cloud connectivity challenge, particularly to support hybrid and multi-cloud strategies, what is it that you're going to need from your network? First, reliability. You really need something that can quickly and flexibly enable resilient network and infrastructure solutions. Second, performance. We've mentioned this a couple of times. You really need a dedicated private connection that delivers low, consistent latency to support the application response times, as well as the performance that is needed by your end users. Third is security. I think we can probably all agree at this point that relying on traffic going over the open internet is not exactly the most secure option. So instead, again, you need that private network connection that's going to help you enable both encryption of your traffic as well as isolate your traffic. Next is scalability. Applications are continuing to grow and adapt, and market conditions continue to fluctuate. And because of this, you really need a network that can quickly scale on demand in response, both from your ability to increase your bandwidth, as well as the ability to quickly add the cloud locations that you need to access. And finally, but certainly not least on the list, is reduced costs. All of this flexibility and scalability, it can really come with a hefty price tag if you're relying on fixed network hardware or fixed circuits that tend to come with long-term contracts. So instead, you need to look for a solution that allows you to eliminate that CapEx for hardware while also optimizing the OpEx spend that you have on the network connectivity you do use. Fortunately, when you come to a Sungard AS Megaport-enabled data center, through our joint partnership, we can help you solve for all of these factors. Now, to talk a little bit more about how Megaport can help you, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague at Megaport, Andrew Coggins.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everyone. As Michelle mentioned, my name is Andrew Coggins. I'm a sales director here at Megaport, and I'm going to go a little bit more over our connectivity solution and how you can leverage us from your Sungard AS environment today. So a little bit more of a background of who we are and exactly what we provide is we are a global software-defined network, or also known as a network as a service. And we partner with Sungard AS and actually 8 of their facilities to really simplify and streamline connectivity to the cloud. As Michelle just mentioned, it's, when it comes to the hybrid IT model, more and more resources, more and more road mapping is pointing towards a cloud-first strategy. And by forming this partnership and this product that sits within the Sungard facilities, we really want you to leverage Sungard AS as an infrastructure hub to simplify and streamline that connectivity to your respective cloud environments. Leveraging this global network as a service, it really allows you to provision and manage connectivity to from a single cloud to maybe a multi-cloud approach. You're able to stand up connections on the fly, instant provisioning to the cloud environments you need to get to. And it really simplifies it with a very user-friendly, streamlined portal to provision and manage all that connectivity from a single console. Here you see on the right side of the diagram here is the cloud providers that we are technology partners with. And by being technology partners with them, we actually have worked with them on their specific connectivity requirements and simplifying that within the portal for you to provision those connections. Each of them have their own types of SLA requirements, different types of product components that you have to leverage. And we really created a very simplified step-by-step process when provisioning those connections over. This is all leveraging a private layer 2 Ethernet network. So it does not touch any of the internet. So back to Michelle's point, really creates a lower latency solution as well as mitigates those security concerns that continually increase when it comes to an internet connection to the cloud. So when it comes to these cloud providers, and they each have their own specific Cloud Connect product offering for private connections. And that's where we refer to the term as a cloud on-ramp. So what exactly is an on-ramp? The cloud on-ramp is essentially that physical handoff point from a private network like Megaport over to the cloud provider's private backbone to get to your cloud environments. For instance, providers like AWS, they leverage a product offering called AWS Direct Connect. Microsoft Azure uses Azure Express Route. And by having these cloud on-ramps globally and strategically positioned within the Megaport network, we really simplify and optimize those connections to the cloud that you need to get to. Today, we have over 180 cloud on-ramps globally. And what that brings benefit to you as is, in terms of an optimal route, we actually have more on-ramps than any other global cloud exchange in the market today. So we're going to be able to find you the closest on-ramp that's going to help both from a latency perspective as well as a networking cost perspective. As you can see on the far left here, in terms of total on-ramps, we have them separated out by cloud provider. Obviously, with some of the major 3 providers, AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, we have more on-ramps in. And so that's going to also help you from, if you have any redundancy or SLA requirements that you need to meet, by having multiple on-ramps for each of these cloud regions allows you to actually build a fully redundant network. You can actually, even from a single port within your Sungard AS facility, provision dual connections to completely separate devices, completely separate facilities, even to your cloud environment to get to reduce that single point of failure and meet any of your specific redundancy or resilience requirements that you need to meet within your network. And we continue to increase this network as well. From having over 600 data centers in our global network today, I'd say on average, we are increasing our network about 20 to 30 data centers per quarter across the globe as well. So we will continue to increase these cloud on-ramps and bring these closer to where you need to get connected at. So a little bit more on where we are positioned within the Sungard AS network today. So we are actually enabled in 8 of their facilities globally, 5 of them being in the United States, 1 in Canada, 1 in London and Paris as well. Now, one thing to note too is if you aren't enabled directly in one of these facilities, maybe you're in a separate facility within the Sungard AS environment, that doesn't mean that you can't leverage the Megaport network. What we would just do is we would coordinate with you and your Sungard AS rep on setting up an interconnect from your facility over to the nearest Megaport location. From there, you have access to the rest of the Megaport global network where you can leverage those cloud on-ramps. You can even leverage from a point-to-point standpoint as well. So being able to provision multiple connections from that single port allows you to really simplify that connectivity, even if you aren't directly in one of these enabled data centers, which we can obviously speak to and speak specifically to your requirements on a one-off call as well. To match Sungard AS's 40-year heritage of resiliency, reliability, and performance, we have a private 100 gig backbone within our network. With this private layer 2 network, we do provide a 100% uptime SLA to help carry that reliance or that reliability and that reassurance of matching from Sungard AS facilities all the way to your cloud regions to provide a fully redundant, fully reliable network solution. So a little bit more of just our model and our portal is that we really built this platform that sits on top of this network to mirror what you're already doing in the cloud today from an infrastructure standpoint. You leverage cloud providers like AWS and Microsoft, for example, to help scale resources when you need them and scale them right back down when you don't. We essentially took that same exact model and put it into the network and the portal that you can leverage from a networking capacity. So say, for example, that you are needing to increase bandwidth during a peak season or even just a couple of hours for a data migration, for example, you can do that exactly within the Megaport network. Our bandwidth in our network is completely elastic. So when it comes to the speed of delivery, you can actually scale those resources up when you need them and scale them right back down when you don't to help mirror what you're already doing in the cloud. This is all done from a very simplified point and click model. And these connections can be provisioned in a matter of minutes. So it's simply a pay for what you use model where the billing is prorated based on what you adjust those connections to and where you're connecting from. And again, as I mentioned before, this is a layer 2 network, so it's a very secure and private connection. So for example, when it comes to specific industries, maybe the healthcare industry as an example, and you're trying to meet HIPAA compliance, or maybe you are a payment processing company and have to reach PCI compliance with a fully secure network, our network lets you leverage that and meet those compliance requirements. So a little bit more just in terms of who we connect. It's a matter of connecting you from your head offices to the data centers that you're leveraging today, as well as the cloud service providers and the network service providers in between, creating it a full network and infrastructure hub. I speak a little bit more to the cloud service provider end and us having these technology partnerships with them. We actually have API integrations built in directly with each of these providers. So what that means is that you're able to actually provision and manage that connectivity and do pretty much 99% of the provisioning within the Megaport portal. And those APIs are going to reflect what you're doing from that portal over to your cloud management console. So if you're looking to provision a connection to AWS, when you go through the steps and accept that connection, that's going to very seamlessly reflect in your management console. And all you have to do from that point is hit the accept button within your AWS console, which we'll show you here in the portal in just a little bit as well. So some common connectivity scenarios that we come across here, and I'll start from the top left, is first just our basic point-to-points between data centers within our network. So if you have multiple facilities and looking to provision direct connections between those data centers, these connections can be actually made in 59 seconds or less between the 2 Megaport-enabled locations. On the right side, which is our more common scenario, is going to be the cloud connectivity piece. So being able to connect from Sungard AS to your respective clouds. One thing to note with our ports is when you provision a port within the Megaport network, our ports are actually a one-to-many ratio. So you can stand up to technically 100 VLAN connections to multiple cloud regions from that single port. Obviously, you have to keep bandwidth and throughput into consideration, but you can even oversubscribe that port and stand up multiple connections to all of those cloud providers that you need to reach. On the bottom left there, we have our cloud-to-cloud connectivity. So we actually have, in addition to just connecting from the data center to the cloud, we have cloud-to-cloud connectivity through our Megaport Cloud Routing Solution, or also known as our MCR. This actually allows you to leverage a layer 3 routing solution that interconnects clouds directly with each other without having to hairpin back to the data center. So when companies do that, especially over an internet connection, for example, and say they're even going from one cloud region to the next, or maybe they're going from one completely separate cloud provider to another, if they're doing that over internet, they're actually going to see pretty significant egress costs of data leaving those cloud environments and going to each other. With a private connectivity model like Megaport, we actually help bring down those egress costs significantly in comparison to internet connection. I know with some of the major providers, we can actually drop those egress costs around 60 to 70% from your monthly egress bill as well. And the bottom right here is the full multi-cloud connectivity scenario, where you may be using multiple clouds, but also have a presence within Sungard AS and need to interconnect everything from there. And that's exactly where you can leverage a port, connect to those clouds directly from the data center, but also stand up an MCR to interconnect those clouds directly to each other, stemming all the way back to your data center as well. So back to what we were mentioning of the whole hybrid IT model, this just shows you that you're able to set up and provision and manage everything from a whole cloud interconnectivity model using Megaport and Sungard AS today. So before getting into the portal, just to highlight what exactly we are as network as a service. So back to the pricing in comparison to what you've maybe seen from traditional providers in the past, it's simply a pay for what you use model. There are no initial setup fees with using Megaport. You can actually go in today and actually set up your own portal login, go in and even put things into a design mode to see how it works and how the overall connectivity would look from that portal. Whereas traditionally, you may be locked into expensive setup costs, maybe long provisioning times, or a certain pricing model. We really try and make it as flexible as possible for you. And next, we do have just speed of delivery. So with a traditional model, you may be having to wait for physical lines to be set up. This could take a week. This could take several months based on the project that you're working on. With our fabric already being pre-built and having a very user-friendly portal, you can provision those connections in a matter of minutes. And then our capacity. So as I mentioned before, with our network being completely elastic, you can right-size the capacity based on your business requirements. Whereas traditionally, say for example, you're working with a provider and had just a 1 gig line, you may have to increase that bandwidth. You may see penalty fees. It's going to be set at a fixed capacity where it's a lot more difficult to adjust it to anything that comes up from a business requirement standpoint. In addition to flexible pricing, we also offer flexible terms. So our ports are actually on a month-to-month basis. You can sign up for a 1 and 3 year term if you're looking for applicable discounts there, where with the traditional model, you're typically locked into anywhere from a 1 to a 3 or a 5 year commitment with no month-to-month flexibility on that as well. And lastly here is just in terms of who we connect with in terms of providers and the ease of use is it's really an intuitive portal to manage all of your connectivity from one single pane of glass. You don't have to deal with multiple vendors to get to specific cloud environments. Everything can be streamlined and managed all from one simplified portal, which we'll get into right now, actually. So I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so what should be showing on your screen now is the Megaport portal. And what you'll notice is Actually, I want to start from the top here. So we actually have the dashboard. So when you log in, this would be the first page. One thing I want to note is our Megaport documentation is very transparent. We provide step-by-step instructions on setting up connections to the cloud, FAQs, instructions just in terms of even billing. All of that can be found in the Megaport documentation, which we provide directly on our website as well as within the portal. As I mentioned, this is a completely self-serve portal, but you do have a full support team here at Megaport to walk you through the portal as well as provisioning those connections. Under here, we do have our company tab where you're able to put in your company profile, manage your users. Perhaps you have your finance team that just needs access to the invoicing, but then your network team that just needs to provision services. You can manage that all from this company tab here as well. In addition to that, under our tools section, we do have also an internet exchange that you can connect to for peering, our MCR looking glass. So if you're wanting to take a look at specific devices and what the bandwidth looks like within those, you can also leverage that. We do also open up our API documentation. So this actually allows you, if you have someone on your side that can write to our APIs, you can actually leverage this to help automate provisioning connections or even configuring bandwidth as well. And lastly, here is our Megaport Marketplace. So in addition to the major cloud providers that you can send up connectivity to, we also have some end customers that actually promote their ports directly in the marketplace. Some good examples of solutions that are out there are UCaaS and VoIP solutions. So if you're looking for optimizing your SIP trafficking, for example, you can actually go in there, see if your vendor is currently out there with their own private megaports that you can stand direct connections to, just like you would with a cloud provider as well. And you too, if you're an end customer that has any private connectivity needs to your customers, you can actually promote your public ports as well. But the main area where you're going to be doing the most of your work is going to be within this services tab that I have pulled up right now. So I went ahead and actually just pre-configured some example ports within a couple of Sungard AS facilities here. As you can see, one of them is in the Sungard AS Aurora facility, and one is in the Karlstad location as well. Each with different connections. One is going to AWS and one is going to IBM. And this is how exactly it would look, more of kind of a bulleted list feel to it, where you see exactly what connections you need. And what we can do here is actually stand up a separate connection from the Karlstad location. So while going through this, it's a very seamless process of going through, finding the provider, and narrowing down on the specific details. So we'll just use AWS as a model for this one. For AWS, we actually do have two different connectivity models based on what your requirements may be, hosted VIF and hosted Connect. We'll go ahead and just select hosted VIF. And then this is going to list all of the cloud on-ramps that we have specifically for AWS. Being in the US, we'll obviously want to filter that down. And you can find the nearest cloud on-ramp to the data center that you're in today. And this is something we can walk you through too and make recommendations on where you should get connected. With this port being in Karlstad, I would recommend us actually going directly to an on-ramp in New York. And then this is going to go into the connection details. And you can leverage this if you have certain terminology or certain verbiage that you need to make for identifying these connections. This is all open field text, and this is going to be reflected both in the network as well as in your billing too, to help simplify identifying it as well. So we'll go ahead and just leave this at 1 gig. And then it's going to go a little bit more into the actual cloud details, where you would need your AWS credentials, your direct connect credentials to go in and actually provision that connection. So this is just an example AWS account ID. If you know your customer ASN number, you can also enter in a BGP authorization key, as well as the specific IP addresses that you get from AWS here. We'll go ahead and click next. And what it's going to do is show everything in a summary. Here's the monthly rate. And even when clicking add VXC, it's not going to order the services yet. It's going to put it into a design state, which you can see it was put into the shopping cart on the side, and now is listed as a VXC for when you do provision this port. Will actually stand up the connection over to that cloud provider. These things can be updated at any time, and as I mentioned, that includes the bandwidth, and the billing would be prorated to that aspect as well. What you see here, so from the port, it shows it in a gray color right now and shows it in a design mode. When you actually would go in and provision the services, you simply hit the order button, and it's going to validate that order. And once it does that, our contracts, our online contracts are all done through our Global Services Agreement, or our GSA, which is reflected on online as well. Just bear with it for a second. It's just taking a minute to look up those services in order, so we'll just give it a second here. And see, so what you'll see from here are both the ports and the VXCs. These are all just on month-to-month terms right here. And as I mentioned, this is where that GSA is going to reflect. And when ready, you can then hit the Order Now button. We won't go forward with that, but what that's going to do essentially is it's going to order the ports. And so it will go from a design state here to then automatically generating a letter of authorization or an LOA for you to hand over to your Sungard AS rep to establish that physical cross-connect. Once that physical cross-connect, that is the only real lead time that you're going to see within the Megaport network. Once that's in place, then it's just instant provisioning from there and being able to stand up these connections on the fly. And this will actually be reflected from a gray status to a green status when that connection is up and running. Similar to how we've shown this on the port side, we do also have that cloud routing solution, the MCR I mentioned. It's the same setup where you can actually go in here and click it, and it's going to go take you through the same steps as well. Same concept of provisioning the connections to each cloud is going to be just like you would from a port, but this is going to be from the MCR side. With the MCR, you don't have to own any physical equipment for this solution. This is all actually on a leased router to where then you're able to immediately deploy an MCR. There are no lead times whatsoever on it. Once you order it, the MCR is ready for you to start provisioning connections to the cloud as well. But these are really the two main products you're going to be seeing and provisioning those connections to. So I will stop sharing my screen, and that's a very high-level overview. We can obviously provide you a more in-depth overview of the capabilities in a one-on-one demo as well. But I will stop sharing my screen. I believe we have it leave it up for questions from there.
Great, thank you, Andrew. That was a really great review of just how simple and easy to use the portal is, as well as just how quick you can get up and running on Megaport. So I'll go over to Todd and see if we have any questions. And just remind everyone on the session today, if you have a question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom, and then we'll look to give you an answer. Okay, Todd, what do we have in the chat box?
All right, perfect. Thank you, guys. Again, this is Todd Wenzel, Solutions Architect with Megaport. So it looks like the first question is, how does Megaport apply redundancy to the links to a cloud service provider? So each data center that Megaport is located has at least a primary and secondary redundant wavelength out of that data center, which would then typically connect to one of our core aggregation data centers. Actually, two of our core data center aggregation locations. And in the core data centers is in a lot of cases where the cloud service provider sits. So let's just say that the traffic to AWS is destined to go out on the primary path out of the data center. If there were some type of an equipment failure on that path, or if there were a fiber cut, that traffic would automatically reroute in 50 milliseconds or less to the redundant path. So the redundant path is diverse. It might be a little longer from a latency perspective, but that is how traffic would reroute in the event of any network issue. And then I think I saw the next question by the same gentleman. And if customer wants a redundant links installed to this. Okay, so a customer wants to have redundant links installed into a specific colo, how are those links diversified for redundancy? So I'm not sure if this is meaning bringing off-net local access loops into the data center. So I'm not sure exactly how to answer the question, but again, it's from a Megaport perspective, we do have the redundant connections, which go to the cloud service providers. And in some cases, cloud service providers do require that customers connect to dual high availability devices on their cloud service provider network. And so the connections that are, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Todd. I was just going to answer for Sungard.
So the connection. Okay, so the connections that are, if a cloud service provider does have HA devices, then Megaport would design services to both of those devices. So if there was an equipment failure on, say, device number 1, that traffic would flow to device number 2 on the cloud service provider network. And also in a lot of cases, Megaport has deployed dual devices within data centers themselves, so customers can have that additional redundancy and resiliency by having 2 Megaports on different devices within the data center. And then, of course, those devices would choose a primary and a redundant path based upon the links that are set up. So the next question is, can Megaport provision private, transit, and public VIFs in AWS or just certain types? So great question. So Megaport really supports 2 models, or really 3 models with AWS. The first model is one of the older models, which is called the hosted VIF. And in a hosted VIF scenario, AWS has a single edge device that we're connected to. And in that model, we can set up a public VIF and a private VIF. The bandwidth for that connection model maxes out at a 5 gig connection. The second model that Megaport supports with AWS is called the hosted connection model. And with that hosted connection model, customers can provision a private, public, or transit VIF. So customers that are utilizing a transit gateway obviously would use that hosted connection model, and then they could do their transit VIF. We also do have an AWS dedicated connectivity model, which is a little bit different. Customers would procure a Megaport at the data center, then they would procure a Megaport in one of the sites where, say, AWS has an on-ramp. And from that physical port of the AWS on-ramp facility, a cross-connect would be ordered to connect directly to an AWS port. And of course, that model supports the transit gateway as well. And Michael, if 2 links are requested from a colo to AWS on Megaport services, can they be set up active, so traffic is flowing both concurrently, but not going over the allocated bandwidth, so that if one link fails, a secondary? Yes. So depending upon the connectivity model, like Microsoft Azure creates an express route, and the express route would be 2 separate links from Megaport to Microsoft Azure's HA devices, and that can be set up by the customer in either a primary failover scenario or an active scenario. So Megaport provides that layer 2 connectivity between the Megaport network and in this case, an Azure resource. And then the customers would create the BGP peering sessions between the cloud service providers and their network equipment. So again, Megaport provides that transparent layer 2. The BGP would actually happen on top of those connections.
And Todd, from the AWS side of that too, is that would be where our hosted connect model would work in terms of connecting to dual devices on AWS's end, right?
That's correct. So AWS hosted connect has high availability pair. Google or GCP You can create connections to dual devices. You can do the same on Oracle. The AWS hosted VIF is the only connection model where it's just a one-for-one configuration. And if customers are looking for diverse connectivity, a scenario with an AWS hosted VIF, what we typically have them do is, if their data center is in Dallas, we would have them create a connection to AWS Onramp in Dallas. And then the second AWS connection, we would have them deploy it into Chicago or Houston. Really, it depends upon where their workloads would sit. So they could have diverse connections, but they would be going to different on-ramps in different cities. Great question so far. I have another one for you here, Andrew. Are there any setup costs or lead times that we have to account for?
So no, from Megaport's end, there are no setup costs with going into the portal. The only things to factor in outside of Megaport charges and lead time is, first, when it comes to lead time, the only thing is going to be just establishing that physical cross-connect from your Sungard AS cage over to Megaport's equipment. From there, the network provisioning is almost instant at that point. And then in terms of any setup costs or additional charges just to keep in consideration, is going to be that physical cross-connect from Sungard AS as well. So our Megaport pricing is, it's very transparent. It's actually directly on our website. You can go to megaport.com/pricing and see what our port charges are, as well as our VXC pricing, to get an estimate of what that would look like from a pricing situation.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. The next question is, can a customer use the same port for both point-to-point connections as well as cloud connections?
Correct. Yes, you can. You can actually leverage that same port for connections to any other connectivity outlets within the Megaport portal, whether that be point-to-point at another data center, to the cloud, or even to our MCR. You can actually stand up multiple connections to all of these services from that same port.
Great. And what if the customer is not directly in a Megaport enabled location?
Yeah, so you may come across that, or if you aren't in one of those 8 locations we went over, it doesn't mean that you can't leverage the Megaport solution. What we can do is we can actually coordinate with you and work on setting up an interconnect path from your Sungard AS location to the nearest enabled location. From there, it's a matter of just establishing the cross connect over to the Megaport equipment, which is where you actually will receive that auto-generated LOA to finalize that interconnection from your data center over. From there, you have access to the rest of the Megaport network to get to the cloud environments that you need to reach.
Okay, thank you. And this is an MCR, Megaport Cloud Router question. Can a customer deploy an MCR to interconnect cloud environments, but also traverse that data back to their data center?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can leverage that same MCR for the cloud to cloud, but also set up a separate VXC or virtual cross connect that goes back to your Sungard AS location. And so you're actually able, from our MCRs, to stand up to 25 VXC connections from the MCR solution to build a fully hybrid networking model, all from within the portal as well. One thing to note on the MCRs is the MCRs, even if they aren't in a Sungard AS location, when you're going through and reviewing those services, that you can still leverage those MCRs. It could be in a completely separate colo, a completely separate city. How our MCRs are positioned are more strategically in kind of the cloud-centric markets globally. So, for example, the U.S. East, we have a number of MCR deployment models you can choose in the Ashburn, Virginia area. Over in U.S. West, we have some located in Oregon, San Jose, California, where typically your cloud environments are going to reside. And why we do that is that way you're able to interconnect clouds directly with each other in that specific region. So that's going to really optimize the latency from a cloud-to-cloud perspective.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. And it looks like there is one more question in Q&A. Are there any additional products, functionality enhancements on Megaport's roadmap?
Yeah, absolutely. We continue to develop our product, and we actually have a rather large product release that is expected to be launched by Q1 of next year, and it's called our Megaport Virtual Edge solution, or MVE. What Megaport Virtual Edge is actually something we are partnering with another company on to stand up SD-WAN instances from the Megaport Portal, in addition to the software-defined networking piece. So you're going to be able to, depending on your SD-WAN provider, go directly in the Megaport Portal, and similar to how you saw some of the automation built in from the MPLS side of things, it's going to have that same concept towards your SD-WAN as well, where you can provision and manage both SD-WAN, your interconnectivity between data centers, as well as your connectivity to the cloud, all from a streamlined portal. So again, that's something our development team is working on and should be ready by the beginning of next year.
And that looks like all of the Q&A questions have been covered.
Great. Thank you, Todd and Andrew, for fielding all of those questions. And thank you to all of you for attending today's session. We hope you found it useful to understand a little bit more about how Sungard and Megaport might be able to help you solve some of your cloud connectivity challenges. Now, if you would like to have follow-up conversations or to learn a little bit more about options specifically for your organization, there's two ways that you can get in touch with us. You can reach out to your Sungard account executive, or you can call into our sales desk at the numbers on the screen for your region. And once again, we appreciate you taking the time to come and hear about our solutions, and have a great day.